much for coming. This is kind of the second part in our series to celebrate the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, which was 50 years ago last month. A phenomenal event in our country's history, and we have the exhibit upstairs that celebrates that event. And tonight we are thrilled to be offering an author of a brand new book. It's called Life Lessons from Speed City. The gentleman who I think a lot of you know, his name is Jim Adkins, and he has a fascinating story to tell about what he learned as the member of the San Jose track team and about racism in our country. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Jim Adkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy, for having me. I want to introduce you to my sister, Robbie, who is a member of the board of the museum here. And I think she had something to do with me getting here. So I stayed in 1967 on a track scholarship and did something very unusual. I didn't think it was unusual at the time, but as time has passed, it does seem to be at least unique 46 years later. I asked Lee Evans, one of the world's greatest sprinters, and he held the world record in the 400 meters for 20 years, he said in Mexico City. He hadn't said it at that point, but he was on his way to that world-class ability. I asked him if he would help me understand the truth about racism. Lee was very gracious, so for the next 2 years, he allowed me to observe his life up close, firsthand, and see what kind of treatment he received as a Negro, which was the term used at that time, in the 60s, in California. Life Lessons from Speed City, Insights into Racism from Track and Field tells my story of what Lee taught me. Tonight I would like to share some of those stories, the impact they have had on my life, and pose the question to all of you, what part will you play in ending racism? San Jose State was known as Speed City because of the preponderance of sprinters. I think at one time, the athletes in San Jose held every world record from 50 yards to 400 meters. They had a lot of different 50 yards, 50 meters, 100 yards, 100 meters. There was 600 meters. There was a world record for that too. So Bud Winter was the coach, and once he had success, he attracted more athletes to come to San Jose. So in the 1968 Olympics, there was a real strong contingent of San Jose athletes in Mexico City. Get some feedback.
I haven't decided.
You haven't decided? Okay.
I know, 46 years later. So
Okay, what some of those do you think? What does this mean to you? Do you understand it? Know what it means?
Black power.
That's what I mean. It means courage.
What'd you say, Carl?
It means courage.
Courage? Absolutely. Any other comments?
It was an incredible moment in the history of our country. Everybody remembers that. Everybody.
It's an iconic picture of a moment, and it's also a very hated picture.
they were roundly criticized by just about every media person at the time.
Absolutely. So, but this is where I'm going to get to this. I write about this in my book. I knew these men personally. They were both at San Jose, and so I had a kind of a bird's eye view of this event, and I tell a little bit about that in my book also, and try to reshape everyone's view of this, because the view of it has been pretty unpopular because of a lot of misunderstanding of why they did what they did, and I try to reshape that a little bit in the book. But we'll get back to that element. There was a lot of things going on that at that time that they weren't a part of, but they became associated with it because of it, and that was unfair. But that's what happened. But Speed City was a great time to be at San Jose. I had no idea when I went there it would be that way. I did not add one bit to the name Speed City. I was a distance runner, and I ran the mile. I ran well enough to be able. But I didn't add to the name Speed City. But it was great to be a part of it, and didn't know what I was stepping into after 2 years of junior college and accepting a scholarship to go there, and knowing that there was a beginning of a history there, but had no idea what kind of real education I was going to get. It wasn't something I had planned to do. The truth was I was uneducated in the area of race. I had a lot of misunderstandings or misconceptions. I wasn't sure what all of it meant. Growing up in Escondido did not give me a lot of exposure to a lot of our culture that was going on in our country. What exposure I did have came from television, from the news, and then just watching the adults in my life watch the news programs in the 60s, and when the dogs were biting people and the fire hoses were hosing people down, and there wasn't outrage in my home. There wasn't necessarily, it was almost an implied acceptance of that as okay. If there had been outrage, I think we would have had a different attitude towards it, but there was nothing, so it was implied that that was needed to be done, and that was okay. There were lawbreakers, and they needed to be dealt with. So I wasn't raised in a home that there was overt racism. It was more of a subtle form, more of just a compliance to the culture we lived in and thinking that we had. So I was uneducated, but something happened in my life, and I won't preach about this, but I adopted a new worldview when I was 17 that embraced a Christian faith. So when I went to San Jose, I said, I want to understand what my own feelings are inside, because if there's something in my heart that's not right, I would like to get it out and remove it. And so I really did want to know the truth about myself also. What kinds of things that I picked up on in life that affected the way I viewed things, and it didn't coincide with the Christian worldview that I had adopted to ask questions and to find out the truth. Lee happened to be the perfect guy to ask to do this. I didn't know he would be the perfect guy to ask. I didn't really even know him that well, but he just seemed like the kind of guy that would accept that opportunity to teach me something. So when I asked him if he would show me what his life was like, and I honestly told him, I said, Lee, I don't know what you experienced. I don't know what it's like to be a Negro and what happens to you, because I couldn't possibly. And some people tell me that your people make stuff up. You perceive things that aren't true. Maybe somebody looks at you funny, so you call it prejudice. I mean, this is what the kind of mentality that maybe was in me, that I honestly told him, I don't know what's going on with that. Will you show me? And being the man of real integrity and character that he was, he said, sure, I'll do that. Not everybody would have done that for me. I don't think any other athlete on the team would have. They wouldn't have had time or the interest, but something about our relationship clicked. And by the way, he's in Nigeria now, coaching pre-Olympic athletes, young athletes. He's spent most of his life in Africa, coaching around the continent. And I got an email from him the other day after I sent him the announcement about this event. He says, I'm going to be in the United States in January and February. Take me with you to some of your speaking events. Really? Okay. So if we have this again, maybe when he's here, he'll come with me and you can hear his story. And he's written a book about his life, and it's a real interesting book too. Anyhow, so he agreed to give me lessons. And I didn't know what that would entail. So the first lesson, we went to church on Sunday morning with his wife and his little boy. And we went through the church service, and it was a service I wasn't used to because it was a Church of Christ where there was no musical instruments. So the singing was really great. It was all done a cappella and with a lot of emotion and a lot of real meaning. Lee didn't have a lot of interest in it. At one point, sometimes he'd just get up and walk out and stand out back and leave us, his wife and I, with this little squirmy 2-year-old, and it was kind of difficult. But he goes, okay, go home and put on some picnic clothes. Picnic clothes? Yeah, we're going on a picnic. I go, Lee, what is that going to teach me about racism? He goes, trust me, just do it. So he dropped me. I went home and I put my picnic clothes on, whatever. And here comes his wife and kid, and they have a little picnic basket, and we hop in his car. And we start heading towards the 17 freeway. And I figured now we should be going to downtown San Francisco. We should be going to the ghetto. We should be going someplace where he's going to show me the realities of life for the poverty that many African Americans were experiencing. We get to the 17 and he turns south. And that heads towards Los Gatos. Now Los Gatos was kind of the fortress of white prejudice and power. And I'm going, where are we going? He goes, just hang on. He takes me to this park, Sunday afternoon, with a lake in the middle of the park. He throws out the blanket, and we set all up, and he goes, now watch what happens. Well, what's going to happen? And no more than he said that, a guy jogs by and says, get out of town, and use the N-word. I mean, I'm just like, what? I mean, I'd never seen that before, never heard that before. And it just was a total shock. And he just looked at me and, yeah, see? And that was the first lesson. See, this is what happens when I go to places I shouldn't, quote unquote, go, according to some standards of white culture. And I just, happened in 1967 in San Jose, California. And then as we were driving home, he got a lot of the double takes. You pull up to a stop sign and white people in the car in front of you, and they kind of look back over their shoulder, you know, and they look again, and he goes, see what they're doing? And I go, what are they doing? And he goes, they're going, what's he doing in my neighborhood? I go, come on, Lee, are you sure? And he goes, yeah, they can't just look back. They have to look again. And so this is, I'm like going, wow, this is stuff I'd never noticed before. But anyhow, that was the first lesson, and that was a real overt form of racism, and those overt forms were very rampant in southern cities, but I didn't expect to see it in California. But unfortunately, that was one of the few times that ever happened when I was with him. A more subtle form of racism occurred in the classroom. We studied together. We were both in the same major, and we studied together, and we took a test. And it turned out that we both got the same score, I think a B+ on the test. I was never an A student. And he handed our test back, and on his test it said, good job, Lee, with an exclamation mark. And there was nothing on my paper. And he goes, see, that's kind of a form of prejudice. What are you talking about? What do you mean? He goes, well, why didn't he write that on your paper? I don't know, maybe. He likes you, he doesn't like me. I don't know. No, he was surprised I did that well because he didn't expect me to be that smart. I go, Lee, come on. He goes, no, that's true. And that was a topic that he and I debated for probably 2 weeks. I tried to get my mind around the fact that this person actually thought that Lee didn't have the same native intelligence that I did, and maybe even more so. He became a Fulbright scholar, so I mean, he was obviously way more intelligent than I was, but this professor did not believe that inherently. Now, the professor wasn't a raving racist, or he wasn't some kind of lunatic that hated black people. He was just raised in his blood with that understanding that black people didn't have the intelligence that white people did. Now, that came from a long history of that being pounded into our culture and the people's minds, and some of it still exists today. But after Lee and I talked about it, and he convinced me that that was the truth, well, actually what he said was, when you see it all your life, you begin to understand it. I says, what do you know, and I read his book, it's called The Last Stand. And in his book, he describes being in elementary school. And in elementary school, in the 3rd grade, when he said, I first began to notice that the teachers treated black children different than white children. He goes, all of us in our classroom, all the black boys had to sit across the back of the room. And all the white kids got to sit up front. That was the first thing he noticed. The second was, he said, if I did something wrong, I'd really get disciplined. If a white kid did the same thing, hardly any discipline. So he said, I began to see there was a difference in the way I was being treated and the way white kids were being. What happened in that classroom, he told me, was just an extension of that very thing. It was hard to, for me to say okay. But I watched the professor the rest of the semester, and Lee was right. He wasn't a hateful man. He was a really nice guy. But he did have that in him, that belief. And it carried over in the way he treated Lee and the way he looked at things. So that was just, kind of not such a overt form, more of a subtle form. Another thing I picked up on, another subtlety, is that a stereo, using an 8-track stereo that you usually have in your car, but he built a converter in a box and built 2 speakers so we could play our 8-track tapes in the house as well as in the car. And my father sent it to me for my birthday, and I unpacked it and set it up in our little apartment. And Lee came over and saw it. He says, I got to have that. I go, what do you mean? He goes, I'm going to buy that from you. I said, I can't tell you that. My father just sent it to me. No, my brother's having his birthday, and I have to have that. How much you want for it? I had no idea. Let me call my dad. So I called my dad, told him the story. He goes, well, yeah, ask for $175, and I'll build you another one. And I thought that would be the end of it. Okay. He goes, okay, let's go to the bank. Now, those track athletes back then didn't get paid. But there was funds available somehow through Nike, through the shoe companies. But he goes, let's go to the bank. So I go, okay. So I'd been to the bank before to get money out of the bank. We walk in the bank, and the guard is kind of slumped down, sitting in the chair. And Lee and I walk in, and he stands up. He's on alert now. There's a black man in the bank. I got to watch what's going to happen. I kind of noticed this. They didn't process it right at the time. This was weird. He stood up. There was other people already in the bank, and he was still sitting down. Then Lee goes to get his money, of course, and he says, I want $175. And okay, what's your account number? I have to go over and talk to the manager. The manager looks him over, and there's all this going on in the background. They're checking everything out. And finally, they go, okay, here's your money. I could have had that money in 2 seconds, but not Lee. And he had money in the account. But there was just this whole concept that we needed to really double check this. That was another subtle form, but it was a reality that I'd never noticed. And this was kind of a scary lesson because I didn't realize I'd stepped across a line at one point when, because of my big feet, as Dale's pointed out, Lee would call me Paddlefoot. Hey, Paddlefoot, how you doing? And I said, well, what's your nickname? He says, well, when I was a kid, they called me Crownhead. And he kind of had a crown head, which was kind of maybe a trait that other African Americans may have carried and had. But, that's what he and I would call him. Hey, crown head, how you doing? Okay, Paddlefoot. And that's the way we'd talk to each other. So we go to the West Coast Relays in Fresno. It's a big track meet every year, and they give gold watches when you win your race. And the team I was on, the relay team, won a gold watch that night, and he won 2 gold watches. So he gets on the bus, and I'm sitting in the back of the bus, and all the team is there, and he goes, hey, Paddlefoot, how many watches did you win? I said, 1. How many did you win, Crownhead? Silence. I might as well have used the N-word, because to them, that was a derogatory thing for me to say to him and describe him that way. So the bus fell silent, and they all turned around and looked at me. And I realized I'd said something that I didn't know quite why, because Lee was comfortable with me calling him that. But so he came back and sat next to me and said, yeah, that's the words you and I use. Don't call me that in front of the brothers. Oh, no problem, no problem. But because he did that, and he put his arm around me and had this little talk, everybody relaxed, and they, okay, he didn't mean it the way it sounded. So it was just kind of one of those moments where you kind of go, gosh, what did I say? Guys back then started doing this low 5 thing, slapping the hand. And they would do that with each other. And I'd go to shake their, do that, and they'd shake hands with me. I go, hey, come on, how come I don't get a hand slap? Well, culturally I just wasn't quite there, but because I was on the team and because I was starting to go to their parties and I was doing a lot of things with them and they could see my friendship with Lee, I became slap-worthy, which was really cool. Hey guys, how you doing? No other white guys on the team got to be slap-worthy, but I got to be slap-worthy, and that was kind of fun. And that was part of the acceptance then that you began to feel and understand. Even though all that was true, and I want to watch my time, I still wasn't done. I mean, I felt like I was pretty cool. I had now gotten in. I was one of the guys, basically, because they accepted me for who I was. I accepted them. I was learning their culture. I was eating hog's paws and greens at their parties, and which is culturally, how do you describe hog's paws and greens? Good. Good. How many of you ever had hog's paws and greens? Anybody here? It's a very African American cultural food, and we used to
Pig feet.
Huh? Pig feet. So We had a track meet in 1967. The San Jose State track team, and I wasn't there in '67, went to Brigham Young to run against the BYU team. And in those days, BYU Mormons had a real apartheid view of the way things were, and blacks were considered inferior. And so when Tommy and Lee and the other athletes went there, they weren't allowed to stay in the dorms or eat in the cafeterias at Brigham Young. They had to eat off campus. And this really infuriated them, and they were like, gosh. So the next year BYU was coming to San Jose. And Tommy and Lee, and they talked to us and said, look, we don't hate the guys. The guys in the uniform we don't hate. It's the name on the uniform we have a problem with. And we want to run them, and we want to run against them and beat them fair and square. We want all of you to do your very best, and we're going to make you all honorary blacks. And we all wore black armbands that day. And we did beat them, and we beat them well. Two guys that did really well that day were Hispanics, Pete Santos and Ralph Gamez. And they scored more points than they should have in the distance races. And so the next week, we were all honorary Mexicans. These were the kind of racial things that were going on that we were having fun with, and people were enjoying, and as we got to grow as a team. And by the way, that team won the NC2A championship that year, the best team, dual meet team in the nation. And I didn't get to participate in that NC2A meet back in Knoxville, Tennessee, but they won the national championship, and that's the kind of team that it was, a high-quality team. I felt like I had kind of arrived and had begun to call out some of the issues in my life, and maybe felt pretty comfortable. I'd met this girl named Brenda, an African-American gal, and she had tried real hard in '67 to conform to white culture with the way she wore her hair. With everything about her, she was straightening her hair and combing it like a white woman would, which was the pressure that was put on women to do that. There was no such thing as an afro at that point, and the men would even cut a part in their hair and kind of try to comb it over to make it look like it wasn't curly hair. There's a lot of pressure on them to try to conform to look like white society, and Brenda was doing that. And then I didn't see Brenda for a long time, and she went through a transformation and began to embrace her own ethnicity in a different level that was emerging at that time that we weren't quite ready for. And the afro came in, and the afro had many symbolic meanings. Some of it was rebellion, some of it was pride, some of it was a style, there was a lot of different things that it meant. And I hadn't seen Brenda, and I was over at the 7-Eleven by my apartment. I was starting to walk out. Here comes this girl walking in with this big afro, Angela Davis size afro, And I go, hey, that's Brenda. Hey, Brenda, how you doing? Gosh, I haven't seen you in a while. And I'm still trying to get used to this look, and what does it mean to her? I didn't know what it meant to her. And that was okay. I was just trying to figure that out. But then I looked, and she had a button on. And the button said, "Black is beautiful." I reacted to that in a negative way. I said, wow, what's wrong with me? I realized I hadn't reached that point yet of acceptance. And I hadn't got to the point where it was okay for her to say that. So, excuse me, I had to work that through. And I had to realize that I can go to all the parties I want, I can be an honorary this or that, and I can get to be slap worthy. But if inside me I still can't accept that, then I'm not there. I'm not where God wants me to be. I'm not the loving, caring person that I think I should be. So I had some work to do. And that was the aha moment that I went, oh, okay, I'm not done. So we continue to work. And to this day, we still have to work on it. I can't say I'm all free of all those prejudices that I was raised with and all those images and all those things that were built into my blood system as I grew up. And I still do react to this day. If we're honest with ourselves, we have to say that's true of all of us. We all have our inborn and inborn prejudices and biases that we have to deal with. And that was my moment of realizing that over 40 years with this knowledge I gained, with this experience I had. Well, I did very little, and I apologize for that. I got out of San Jose, went to seminary, worked in churches, mostly white churches. Really never made too much an issue of it because it really wasn't an issue. And I knew something was true, but I didn't do much about it. And that's what, I'm sorry I've waited this long in my life to become an advocate and to try to help my peers understand the realities and truths of what goes on in our culture and the division that we have and the hierarchy we still have and what white privilege we have in our culture and how things are accessible to me that aren't accessible to everyone. I have opportunity to do things, and I live today because of the opportunities that came my way solely because I was a white person. I achieved a lot of things that I didn't maybe really deserve or earn, but they came my way. And I have to help my peers understand that we have a long ways to go. Here's what I was challenged to put them in writing, and I never did. And so a couple years ago, I finally did. And it's opened a whole new door for me and a whole new awareness of what needs to be said and where it needs to be said. I really enjoy talking with, well, I have to say, what have I done? What am I doing now? What I see is there's a lack of compassion in our culture for people of color. Basically, white people can pretty much not have a whole lot of compassion for the issues that are around them. We can pretty much ignore them and not have to feel a lot of deep feeling about it. And I think that was kind of true of myself. And so what have I done to develop my compassion and understanding? Well, I've read a lot. I read a lot of books now. I read a lot of articles. And I have a reading list here of some books my wife and I have read over the last couple of years that have helped me develop a deeper compassion for what our culture is and what people in our culture go through, people of color. And so I just want to hand these out. If you're at all interested in doing some reading, you can get most of these off of, if you've got an e-reader, you can get them through an e-reader. And they're it's just a simple bibliography, and ones that you might not have heard of, ones that you may have. I would say that one of the most informative ones was called Behind the Dream, The Making of the Speech That Transformed a Nation. And that was by Clarence Jones, and Clarence Jones was Martin Luther King's right-hand man in making the speech. And he gives a lot of the backstory behind the march, the whole development of the march, the making of the speech. That was a very informative book. Another one I read was called Red Summer. I don't think it's on this list. I don't know if I put it on. It's on the backside. Red Summer. After World War I, 1919. We had 100,000 black soldiers fight in Europe. They were defeated in France. The French loved them. A lot of them, they came home to America and thought, okay, things are going to be different now. We've fought for our country. We're going to have a different level of respect now. Hopefully we can go back and be a part of America at a different level. Didn't happen. Didn't happen at all. So the summer of 1919 became called the Red Summer because riots broke out all over the country in major cities that summer in protest and in frustration of the lack of progress that had been made and the lack of respect for these soldiers and what they had done for our country. So it's called Red Summer. It's a novel, it's fiction, but it's post-Civil War, and it's about three different individuals post-Civil War and their stories of now this newfound freedom. What does it mean? And the struggle of now going from being a slave to being free. The lack of knowledge and understanding what that meant. How do I do that? What do I do now? And then some of the people that still try to keep that from happening. What happened to white Northerners who came down and tried to help educate the black children in the different towns and how they were told you don't do that. You just don't understand the order of things. Now get out of here. And the troubles they had in just trying to change things. So it's a fiction book, but it's filled with, I think, a lot of very good truth. So these are just some of the books that I would recommend you would read if you would like to understand a little bit more about the history in our country. But so reading these has given me both my wife and I, a deeper compassion and understanding, and makes us more sensitive to things we hear and read see happening around us. David Moore is a friend of mine, and he said, if people knew more of the story, they would be voracious readers of black history, and they would be on the front lines in the struggle for justice for all. The history taught in our schools leave out many important contributions blacks made in our initial fight to become a nation and the years following. The first book on that list that I gave you is called Oneness Embraced by Tony Evans, and he gives a history lesson in there about different blacks that played important roles way back in the American Revolution, and things that happened that you never hear their names, but they played just as important a role as many other people. Another thing I do is I've talked to many people of all colors listening to their stories. And the most difficult thing to do is to talk to somebody that has some kind of warped views and not argue with them, but just listen and try to understand. Try to call out of them, what do you really feel? What is it you're really thinking about that? I had a couple over at our house for breakfast a couple months ago. As a pastor, I've done a lot of weddings. I married this couple 20 years ago in Fullerton. And on their 20th anniversary, they wanted to come have breakfast with my wife and I on their way to a weekend away. So we set it up and they came over for breakfast, and we talked about my book. And you could tell within them this resistance to the acceptance of people of color and the struggles they had. And I was really kind of surprised as I listened to them. And I didn't, my wife was getting nervous about it, but I just, I don't argue, I just listen. And they revealed a lot of truth about what they really felt. And it was kind of, I didn't like it, but they did it. But I told them my side of the story. And I told them the developing compassion that I had, and I think that other people need to have. And she sent me the nicest thank you note, and in that thank you note, I wish I would have brought it, she said, I really listened to what you had to say, and I think I have a ways to go in that, and I'm going to try doing some more reading. So that was really important that happened. But I also listen to stories when I meet an African American. Not everybody can do this, because it's easier for me to say, how's life going for you? And look at me, what do you mean? I said, well, are you experiencing much prejudice or racism? And they still looked at me. I said, the reason I'm asking is I wrote a book on racism. You did? I said, yeah, I was teammates with the guys that did the black. You were? Okay. And now I'm at a different level relationally with them, and then we can begin to talk. And they tell me stories, modern day stories of things that happened. This one gal, she was the manager of the Office Depot in Costa Mesa. And I said, well, how's it going and what's happening? And we got talking, and she goes, well, I've only experienced a couple times a couple racial things. She goes, yeah, I'm the manager here of this store. And people come in, older white men come in and say, can I talk to the manager? And they'll come back and get me, and I'll go, yeah, how can I help you? Yeah, I want to talk to the manager. I am the manager. You're the manager? And they just can't accept. She's a woman and she's black and she's the manager? And she just senses this, real subtle thing. But she's out picking up baskets one day, getting the carts out, and the guy comes by and he goes, you're working hard, aren't you? She goes, yeah, I always work hard. Yeah, I can tell. She goes, well, how can you tell? There's no stripes on your back. She's, what? Amazing. So I think listening to people's stories, learning how to dialogue about issues, not being afraid to dialogue about issues, not being afraid to say, hey, I heard a guy give a message on racism, or I read a book on it, or I'm curious how your life is, or how, just anything to begin to dialogue about. And we need to continue. I do some preaching at black churches, and my message they find to be comforting, that somebody is speaking on their behalf and understanding what the issues are for them with that, so that there's more voices saying, hey, this isn't right, this needs to be changed. We need to work on this. The other thing I did is I joined the Orange County chapter of the NAACP. I got this nice little keychain, and a lot of people look at me, what? You did what? I said, hey, it's a nice group of people. They pray before the meetings. They even have me pray. We talk about important issues, and there should be more white people, members of the NAACP. I said, I don't agree with everything that their president just resigned, jealous. And I didn't agree with everything he had to say and all his stances on every issue, but the majority of the issues I can agree with and I can be supportive of. There was a family that moved to Yorba Linda, by where we live, and the husband was a LAPD and the wife was a sheriff, and they had 2 sons. And they had to move out here to Marietta because they got their house acid bombed and their cars, all these problems. And after they moved, it came out that had happened. So I emailed the president of the NAACP and said, what are we going to do about this, And all the communities got together and they organized these community meetings where people came together and they got an opportunity to express what they'd been experiencing. And like the chiefs of police of different communities would come to these meetings. Chief of police of Irvine went away going, I can't believe what I just heard. It's happening right here in my town. And people had a freedom to express and talk in small groups about their experiences. And that came out of the fact that had happened right there in Yorba Linda this last year. So there's things you can do to join. There's people you can associate with to begin to understand what the struggles are. Harvard that didn't allow Jews and blacks. He had a personal battle going on with Tommy and John and Lee because he wanted to let the South African athletes in the '68 Olympics, white South African athletes. And Tommy and Lee and the leaders of that track team said no. And Avery Munnage, if you know his history, he was involved in the '36 Olympics. He was the president of the United States Olympic Committee, and he got duped by Hitler. He went over and Hitler showed him all the good things that were happening and hid the truth about what he was doing to Jews. And Avery Brundage came back as a proponent of Hitler and that we needed to go to those Olympics and blah, blah, blah. And then he ruined Jesse Owens' career after that. He took his ability to compete away because he didn't want to stay in Europe for 3 months after the Olympics. He wanted to get home to his wife. And Avery Brundage now was the president of the International Olympic Committee and still carried those same tendencies, and everybody knew it. And so that was one of the reasons that Tommy and John knew that they were going to win the medals, and they thought that Avery Brundage was going to put the medal around their neck and shake their hand. So they had a glove in they were going to have the glove in their pocket, and when Avery Brundage went to shake their hand, they were going to put the glove on and give him a secret message that said, you don't want to touch us, we don't want to touch you. But it turned out he didn't give out the medal, so they had to improvise and come up with the iconic picture. Now that's a story that Tommy Smith won't agree with, but all the rest of us think that's what happened. There's a lot of debate about that, but that is part of the whole story there. When I hear and see it, people use jokes, they say jokes, they send out emails that are not nice, and you have to call people on it. You have to say something. And I mentioned that in a message I gave down in San Marcos, and a young man came up and goes, that really convicted me because at work this week, he works in an electronics factory of some kind, and the guy made a racial joke about an Asian guy, and he didn't say anything. And he says, I'm not going to let that happen again. And I hear that, I'm going to say, hey, wait a minute, who do you think you are making jokes about him? He said, I understand now. I've got to do my part to say things to stop this kind of mentality. And to kind of wrap it up, I want to read something from my book, just the last part. I didn't talk about the Black Power salute, but maybe we'll have a chance to do that. The last part of my book, I just want to read a statement here. We all need to work hard at ferreting out the negative stereotypes from our upbringing. Everyone has the ongoing need to grow, mature, and educate those around us. We need to strive not to pass the subtle and overt attitudes toward other races to our children. I hope my grandchildren will be more mature than my generation with regards to race and differences. Their name's Gomez. they're blonde-haired, little half-Mexican, they're great little girls, but they're going to grow up in a society where Gomez may not, get doors open sometimes, or they may have to face some things, but hopefully they'll have a different attitude. Many people find through spiritual conversion they can begin to treat others in a loving way. But whether an atheist, agnostic, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, humanist, or Christian, we should all heed these truths. If we could, and there I have 3 quotes, if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. We need not wait to see what others do. Gandhi said that. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. Buddha said that. Will you join me in praying for a day of love, brotherhood, and unity? And so that's kind of what I'm saying.